On February 29, 2000, a 45-year-old divorced man with two children named John Price applied to the court to obtain a restraining order against his former partner, Catherine Mary Knight. According to John, the woman had begun threatening him. Shortly after he rejected her marriage proposal, several serious arguments ensued, which culminated in physical violence on her part. Furthermore, the man contacted some of his colleagues and warned them that something bad would happen to him if he didn't show up for work. Amazingly, John didn't show up for work the next day. This raised some questions among his colleagues who weren't quite sure whether he was joking or not. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach John by phone, his boss decided to send one of his employees to personally check on him. Around the same time, one of the man's neighbors was also concerned that John's car was still in the parking lot. Finally, he decided to go to the house and knocked on the door several times. But contrary to his expectations, no one opened the door. It seemed as if there was complete silence in the house. But was that really the case? After standing in front of the door for a few more minutes, John's neighbor decided to look through one of the bedroom windows to rule out the possibility that the man was still asleep. At first glance, it did indeed seem as if no one was in the house. At least there was no movement. However, upon closer inspection, the neighbor noticed several large bloodstains directly on the floor next to the door to that room. He immediately called the police and explained the situation to them. The police arrived within just 10 minutes. It was only 8 a.m. When they examined the house from the street, the police didn't notice anything unusual. Nevertheless, they decided to enter the house to rule out all possibilities. What they found inside, they described as both utterly gruesome and unimaginable. It wasn't even difficult to find the perpetrator, as she had been right in the house the whole time. This story is dedicated to Catherine Mary Knight, a woman who became one of the most famous female murderers in Australian history. According to available information, Catherine was born on October 24, 1955, in the regional town of Tenterfield in New South Wales, Australia. She was the daughter of Barbara Rogan and Ken Knight. Her mother, Barbara, had previously married another man named Jack Rogan. They lived for a long time in Aberdeen, where they had 4 children together. However, the woman's extramarital affair with Catherine's future father, Ken, who was a close friend of her husband, led to a rapid separation. Eventually, Barbara left all 4 children in the care of Jack and moved in with her new partner, Ken Knight. Together, they started a new family, which also included Catherine, her twin sister, 2 brothers, and a sister. Sadly, Barbara's ex-husband, Jack Rogan, died in 1959. As a result, 2 of their 4 children moved in with her. Even then, it was clear that the situation in the house where the children were to grow up was, to say the least, unsuitable. The main reason for this was probably that Ken was a rather violent and rough person who had serious alcohol problems. Because of these problems, he often abused Barbara and beat their children. However, the mother was also far from ideal in the traditional sense of the word. For example, she liked to tell her daughters about her intimate life with her husband. It is obvious that such parental behavior had to have an effect on the children. It is known that Catherine's brothers adopted their father's habits and repeatedly subjected her to various forms of physical violence. Once, she told her mother about the situation she found herself in and met with no understanding. Barbara simply advised her to stop complaining about her life and to try to come to terms with what she had gone through. Eventually, the bullying continued and left an indelible mark on Catherine's psyche. During her school years, she was a rather withdrawn and sullen girl who believed that everyone around her wanted to suppress her interests. Because of this, she constantly got into arguments with her classmates, and once even attacked a peer with a knife she had secretly brought in her backpack. Despite the constant fights and arguments with those around her, Catherine did quite well at school. Later, however, she became completely withdrawn and eventually dropped out. After that, she found her first job as a cutter in a sewing factory. She stayed there for about a year. Soon after, the young Catherine began working at a large slaughterhouse in Aberdeen. There, she not only acquired good knife skills, but also rose through the ranks. According to her colleagues, she enjoyed this work so much that she sincerely called it her life's work. She even hung her first set of butcher knives above her bed. She would often look up at them before going to sleep, and apparently this gave her great pleasure. In 1973, Catherine began to behave more and more aggressively. At that time, she met her first husband, a 22-year-old young man named David Kellett, who had previously worked for a local railway company. Shortly before they met, he had been fired for alcohol problems. These circumstances forced David to work at the aforementioned slaughterhouse, where he had met Catherine. After getting to know each other better, the young couple decided to marry. According to rumors, their wedding night was unforgettable. After they had been intimate 3 times, David fell asleep, and Catherine was furious, believing that 3 times wasn't enough. Finally, she literally lunged at her husband and tried to strangle him. Fortunately, she failed. Nevertheless, this was only the beginning of their turbulent relationship. In fact, they experienced several incidents involving physical violence, and it must be said that these incidents became more frequent over time. It is known that their last heated argument occurred shortly before the birth of their child. It all began when David arrived home a little later than usual, and instead of asking her husband why he was late, the wife decided to hit him on the head with a frying pan. When she saw the stream of blood that immediately spurted from David's head, Catherine began screaming and calling for help. When a neighbor heard her shrill cries, he called the police and the woman was arrested. However, Catherine's arrest was short-lived and she returned home after just a few hours. In May 1976, David finally decided to leave Catherine. He could no longer tolerate her aggression as she took out her anger on their young daughter after these outbursts. Shortly before the separation, she even left the stroller with the child on the railway tracks. Fortunately, the child was rescued by a homeless man looking for food. When Catherine found out about this, she immediately lost her temper. When she returned from work, she grabbed an axe and went out into the street, threatening passers-by. Eventually, one of the witnesses reported her to the police, and just minutes later, she was arrested and taken to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with postnatal depression. After her release from the hospital, Catherine got into trouble again. She took her daughter and one of the butcher knives and attacked an unknown woman. Catherine wanted her to drive her to David's home in her car, and when the woman refused, she punched her several times in the face. Fortunately, the woman managed to escape. She made it to a gas station where she asked for help, and the employees called the police. When the police arrived, they saw a woman waving a knife while holding a child. Once Catherine was calmed down, her daughter was taken to safety, and she herself was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again. She was later placed in the care of her maternal grandparents, and her father was informed that Catherine was being cared for in the psychiatric ward of the Morisset Hospital. On August 9, 1976, Catherine was released from the hospital and placed in the care of her mother-in-law, who was to ensure that she took all her prescribed medication. Amazingly, Catherine and David moved back in together after just a few weeks. However, their peaceful coexistence was short-lived, and the couple continued to be the center of attention. Despite everything, another daughter was born on March 6, 1980. Several years passed, and one day when David returned home from work, he found that neither Catherine nor her daughters were there. It turned out that they had moved in with Catherine's parents on a farm somewhere near Aberdeen. There, the young woman found work again in a slaughterhouse. However, due to her character, she was quickly dismissed. Catherine soon moved again, and about a year later, she developed severe back pain, which forced her to give up her job. Fortunately, the local authorities not only provided her with good social assistance, but also helped her find a small apartment near the school her daughters would attend. So, at 30, the tall, slim, and somewhat attractive Catherine just needed a good and caring man. Outwardly, she appeared to be a cheerful and happy woman. Deep down, however, she was still aggressively jealous. Be that as it may, her looks allowed her to meet a wide variety of men, including 38-year-old miner David Saunders. He was considered a handsome and charming man. His only problem, it seemed, was that he loved to drink like no other. Nevertheless, the two found common ground, and at first, everything was wonderful. Over time, their relationship became more serious, and so they decided to move in together. So David moved in with Catherine and her daughters, and almost immediately after the move, the arguments and quarrels that had always characterized the woman surfaced. Catherine constantly accused Saunders of having secret affairs with other women. Sometimes they argued for hours about these accusations. One fine day, Catherine finally threw her man out of the house. But the very next day, she began begging David to come back. However, their conflicts did not stop even after his return. In May 1987, after another heated argument, Catherine took Saunders's 2-month-old puppy and killed it in front of him, declaring that the same thing would happen to him if he ever thought of having an affair with another woman. Despite the loud arguments and other equally horrific incidents, Catherine gave birth to their third daughter in June 1988. Shortly after her birth, David and Catherine bought a small house, which was later decorated with cow skulls, various animal traps, and bullhorns. Among the other items that adorned the house were giant pitchforks, wooden spoons, rakes, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, several old biker jackets, cowboy boots, and a saddle. All the free space in the house was crammed with newspapers. Also lying around were dirty clothes and old books that hardly anyone had read. Undoubtedly, Catherine liked this arrangement. Perhaps it even gave her pleasure. However, it didn't last long, because after another argument in which she hit Saunders with an iron and stabbed him in the chest with scissors, he decided he could no longer bear all the humiliation and left the house. Naturally, Catherine tried to find the man and somehow atone for her guilt, but she couldn't find him. In her desperation, she even cut up all his clothes and threw them away at the dump. Amazingly, David returned home after some time. Apparently, he simply wanted to see his daughter. It must be said that he was genuinely shocked that Catherine had gone to the police during his absence, claiming that he might harm her. Even more astonishing, however, was that the woman had since married another man. Her new partner was a 43-year-old man named John Chillingworth, a colleague from her previous job. In 1991, Catherine had her fourth child. This time, it was a boy. Many of the woman's neighbors were surprised that there were no open conflicts or scandalous situations between her and her partner, John Chillingworth. However, this by no means meant that they were happy together. At the very least, something was definitely wrong, because after 3 years of living together, it turned out that Catherine had been having a secret affair with a man named John Price the whole time. This very circumstance was the main reason for the end of their relationship. At first, Chillingworth was very upset about the breakup with Catherine. It wasn't her fault, however, but rather the fact that he had to leave his son. But I think after what happened next, he certainly felt like the luckiest man on earth. As for John Price, he was already divorced when he began a relationship with Catherine. He also had 2 children who, for unknown reasons, lived with him rather than their mother. After her divorce from Chillingworth in 1995, Catherine moved in with Price. At the time, the man worked in the local mines and earned a good living. Initially, their life together was quite happy. Nevertheless, Price knew that Catherine was an incredibly strong-willed woman with a difficult character. It is known that she herself asked him to marry her in 1998, but he immediately refused. In revenge, Catherine filmed all the items she believed Price had stolen at work and sent the video to his boss. In reality, however, the items were old medical instruments that the man had taken from a dumpster on the company premises. Be that as it may, he was fired anyway, and when the man returned home, he and Catherine argued violently. Eventually, he threw her out of the house and said he wanted nothing more to do with her. Nevertheless, they resumed their relationship a few months later. This time, however, the man did not allow Catherine to return to him with her belongings. This decision subsequently led to numerous arguments, which became increasingly frequent and heated over time. At one point, Catherine even began to slander the man to her friends, telling them that he was abusing her daughters, which was obviously not true. In February 2000, the two had another heated argument, during which Catherine stabbed Price for the first time. Essentially, this very event marked the beginning of the end, at least as far as the man's life was concerned. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, on February 29, 2000, Price contacted the authorities to obtain a court order against Catherine. The man also contacted some of his colleagues and told them that if he didn't show up for work one day, it would mean that K.A., as he sometimes called her, had done something bad to him. Well, he was actually right. When Price returned home, his children were gone. It turned out that Catherine had taken advantage of his absence to drop the children off at some mutual friends' houses. Apparently, the woman wanted to pretend to reconcile with the man. Around 11 p.m., when Price was already asleep, Catherine came into the house and sat down in front of the television. She didn't have to break down the door because she still had a key. Afterward, she took a shower and woke the man to have sex with him. After they finished, Price fell asleep again, unaware that this night would be the last of his life. And it must be said that Catherine really thought of everything. She had placed her butcher knives strategically in the house in case Price tried to escape. Once Catherine had made sure the man was asleep, she took one of the knives, sat on top of John, and plunged the blade into his stomach. He immediately woke up in pain and tried to push Catherine away. However, she managed to overpower him. She stabbed him about 37 times. This also explains why, upon entering the house, the first thing the police discovered was numerous blood spatters on the floor and walls. But that was far from all. Upon further investigation of the house, one of the police officers noticed what looked like a curtain hanging between 2 rooms. When he reached to remove it from its hooks, it became clear to everyone that it wasn't a curtain. Apparently, immediately after murdering Price, Catherine began her familiar routine. Part of the man's skin was then used as a curtain, while the other part was placed in a large pot of vegetables. Catherine then separated Price's buttocks and cut them into small pieces, which she spread out on a baking sheet. The woman then brought out dishes and set the table, placing small pieces of paper with the man's children's names next to their plates so they could take their places. Apparently, Catherine intended to feed Price's children his own flesh. The man's body was found lying down with his legs crossed and one arm outstretched. Catherine herself lay beside him. It turned out that she had swallowed pills to take her own life. However, she was unsuccessful and was taken to the nearest emergency room. According to available information, She did not fully regain consciousness until March 4th of that year. That day, the police came to her hospital room to question her about the incident. However, she stated that she could not remember anything. After some time, her lawyers tried to prove that due to various mental health issues, she simply couldn't be brought to trial and held criminally responsible for her actions. Eventually, the authorities had to obtain a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether Catherine was ill or not. Following this evaluation, 3 experts declared that she was sane at the time of the crime and knew exactly what she was doing. Nevertheless, she was diagnosed with what is known as borderline personality disorder, which typically involves a person being unable to control their emotions and impulses. During the trial, Catherine's lawyers continued to insist on her innocence, attributing everything that had happened to mental health issues and amnesia. The prosecution, however, insisted the opposite, stating that the woman wasn't ill and that her main problem was that she was used to doing whatever she wanted. Cornered, Catherine finally admitted to murdering John Price. And on November 8, 2001, the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. Catherine is currently in a women's prison called Silverwater. There, the woman is called Nana, which translates as kind and gentle person. Within the walls of this institution, she is known as a peacemaker, mediating various disputes and preventing them from escalating. During her imprisonment, Catherine has never been involved in a conflict situation and is a true role model for other inmates. However, I doubt many of them simply don't know that it's better not to mess with her, because behind the mask of this kind and gentle woman lurks a ruthless murderer. Thanks for watching, and take care.